because I was afraid, what if electricity goes? Yeah.
Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me.
Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining in conversation with Gabriel Ndayishimiye, the author of RUN ELVIN, a memoir that I frequently reviewed that I found very wonderful, absolutely captivating. And it's a pleasure to have Mr. Gabriel Ndayishimiye on the show. Hi there, Mr. Gabriel.
Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm really excited to speak with you concerning your book. You know, this is the first time I've read anything about, what's it called? Authors having experience in refugee and all of that. And I was curious to ask you, I found the memoir quite captivating and absolutely enthralling. And I want to ask you, what is it like to live as a refugee?
It's a very tough situation, living as a refugee, because you don't have, you're living in a situation whereby you don't have, normal rights as the average person, as the average citizen is supposed to have. So your rights are limited, and mostly our freedom to movement, all those kinds of necessary rights that people are supposed to be enjoying in their mother country. So you don't have those ones. But also the conditions in which you live are very tough conditions, concentrated in a refugee camp, and the living conditions there are not good. So it's a very tough experience, but people still come out, alive and strong. So,
wow. Read your book. There's some lot of emotion that is instilled into each one. Well, okay, in your book, also you wrote about the Wonder Genocide and how it influenced, the whole war and all of that affect many Rwandans, including your mother and yourself. Could you tell us more about this genocide and its consequences on the nationals?
So the Rwandan genocide happened when I was 2 months old, and my family fled when I was 2 months old. So much of the experiences, my family was deeply impacted because they fled their country and then they lost property, during the fleeing. But also so many people, so many families were impacted. So many people died, about, 800,000 people. But even after the Rwandan genocide, a lot of people were killed in the forests of Congo.
Wow.
Not to forget those who died along the way during the fleeing period. So it was a terrible moment in Rwanda's history, as I said in the chapter. But I think that right now the country is recovering, not at the pace that I would want it to recover, or not at the, but it's recovering, and things are finally getting back together, getting back to normal. Hopefully we don't have another genocide in the near future.
I hope so. I hope so, because I also read a particular documentary, and I remember this genocide of a thing made me remember a particular, movie that I watched in time past, which is titled Sometimes in April. I think I mentioned that in my review. And when I read your book, I was like, oh, it made me remember Sometimes in April. And I watched that, movie when I was very much younger. Like, I think it should be around maybe 7 years ago or 8 years ago. I'm not sure anyway. I'm not sure of the exact year, because I can't actually, denote about that. So, there's also a section of your book that I find quite fascinating in page 22, where you wrote about the struggle that most African youth undergoes to attain higher education. I found this part very deep, and it's a look into what's truly happening in the African society today. You mentioned that you were also a victim of this particular phenomenon, and I am curious to ask you if you could share with us some of your struggle that you experienced in terms of obtaining a university education.
So, as I said in the book, growing up in a refugee camp is challenging. But, the most struggles that young refugees, like the struggles that I went through, were the very same struggles that my peers who were citizens, let's say Malawians, whom we were attending school together, went through, when we both, for example, when we both finished the secondary school, most of us, we found ourselves at a trajectory whereby, we couldn't continue further. There was no money to continue with school.
Yeah.
For Malawian kids who were coming from, not so wealthy family, not so well-doing family in terms of financial and all that. But also for young refugees, you finish school with hopes of not attending, higher education because in the country where you live in, the laws do not really permit you to attend university education in that particular country. So it's all those, but the struggle for an African young person to attain higher education is still a big problem, on the continent. Especially now that we have so many young people who are eager, who are educated, who have finished high school, who really want to go further with their studies. So I sympathize with that. I sympathize with them because if I hadn't been lucky to come to Canada, I would be one of those young people who are struggling across different countries there. So I feel for everyone in the situation.
Wow, that's one of the thing I found quite resonating in the book, because while I was reading it, and I was like, it's not only particular to Gabriel Ndayishimiye alone. I was like, the experience, some of the things he wrote about in the book, it's a look into what is happening in the African society. It's a look into what most, the Black people are passing through, most young people that are very talented, who are action driven, who are self-oriented, and they just have this kind of, issue ongoing with them. And the government is doing nothing. I'm not doing nothing to help the situation expert. And I want to ask you, what impact do you think the government has to play on this? It's somewhat different from what I would have asked, but I just want to have your opinion. What impact do you think the government has to play towards the roles of young children, driven people, helping them with something like a scholarship availability or something like that?
I think our governments are very poor, Most of African governments are very poor. They have very little budget when it comes to, to supporting young people to attain basically higher education, and even secondary school education is still not attainable to some because you have to pay tuition fees to attend secondary schools. But the most problems, when it comes to issues in Africa, a lot of money is misused in terms of corruptions. A lot of funds that could have gone to help, these young people who are struggling or young people want to continue with their education. Misused. It goes into corruption, and then it affects the entire population. So I would say that. As much as we have issues in our own countries, issues with our own governments, it's not that the situation couldn't be managed. It's just that mostly funds are embezzled and are misused. And those funds could help, 2 or 3 or, who knows how many people could be helped by money that is mostly wasted, in corruption practices.
Yeah, that's great. Mr. Gabriel, at what age did you, did you struggle with the stigma of your father's identity? At what age did you struggle with the stigma of your father's identity? I read in page 43 of how you would look at other children while they hug their father returning from work at evening, and how you sometimes feel jealous about it. I also read about your strange reaction when someone caught Paul in the book, mentioned that your father lives in Belgium, and that sparks you off. Can you tell us more about your reaction at that time?
Yeah, so I started struggling with fatherlessness at the age of 4. So I grew up with my grandmother at my grandmother's place. At that time, my mother was still very young, and she was also living with me, but also she was also attending school. So I always thought my mother was my sister. So I called her by her name, but I was also at the same time I was breastfeeding, right? It's crazy because I knew who I was breastfeeding on. I just didn't recognize her as my mother. My mother was my grandmother. My father was my grandfather.
Oh.
But then later on, she got married. When she got married to another Burundian man, I was transferred from my grandparents' home to my mother's, and her new husband's home. And so that's when things clicked that, oh, okay, so things happened. Unfortunately, I don't have a father. And that's when I started really questioning about where is my father? But I never had courage to ask my mother at that age until I was basically, 23, 24 years old. That's when I started confronting my mother that what really happened. I'd never heard that story. So growing up, I had jealous of kids who had their fathers, who had every support in place for them. But so I talk in the book. I talk about the guy who confronted me, with who claimed to know where my father was, and who claimed to know my father in the country. And that's when I started doing my own research, asking my grandmother about, but they didn't have information because my father and my mother met at secondary school, before the genocide. That was in 1990. In 1993, they had their own issues. And then I was born in 1994, just right before the Rwandan genocide. And they lived in different districts, And so when my mother was having me, it was during the holiday. And my father was also at holiday, was in holiday in a different district as well. So when the Rwandan genocide happened, everybody ran their way, and that's how I lost contact with my father. So Ever since then, we've never met. Ever since then, there have been no trace of him. There is no information about him or his relatives that I can, I can pinpoint to start my search. So. But I'm a grown-up man right now with my own son, so I'm trying to prevent that situation from happening again.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I also read of a place where you fancied on riding in car for the first time. When I read your book, when the Tanzania government announced, all Rwanda's refugees should, return back to their country during the forced repatriation, and how you and your mother and your other relatives were, getting ready to move to Malawi, and you were shy then. You were fascinated to the outlook and the privilege that you're gonna get, to walk many sandals and the joy of riding in a car for the very first time. When I read this part, I laughed, and I don't know if you can share with us, how you feel ecstatic at that time.
Yeah, so when I was very young, I always thought Rwanda was the only country in the world, and Rwanda was the only best country that ever existed in the world.
Wow.
And then we moved to Tanzania, and then I knew Tanzania, okay, Tanzania is another country.
Yeah.
And then around 2000, I think there was World Cup. I don't remember which year that was. That's when we started buying bubble gums about bubble gums with the stickers of different countries, And so because the situation in Tanzania was worse, I always thought that in other countries, they are actually beautiful than Tanzania, White people live in those countries. Those were stories basically which were taught to us, every kid has got a toy to play with. Every kid has got, wear sandals, wear shoes. We didn't wear shoes in Tanzania. And so I thought that by moving from Tanzania to a different country, Kenya or Malawi,
You have
our
the
life
no
situation
way
were going to
inside.
change. Yeah, we would live in a very beautiful house. We
What?
live in a very beautiful, we go to a very beautiful primary school.
Wow.
And so I was excited of all that, you know. I wanted the misery from in Tanzania to end, basically.
Wow. That's fascinating. You know, when I actually read that part, I was like, wow, I'm gonna ask him about this. I need him to elaborate more. You know, I was also surprised when I read a section in page 72 where your fellow traveler named Nsenga caught trouble in the train. And when he was visited by some security, he started pointing out other fellow travelers like yourself and some other people who are escaping from, I think at that time, was it Malawi or Burundi? I can't remember. So you wrote about how it led you on to beginning to jump out of the train one after the other. And I found this part somewhat sorrowful and action driven. And I'd love you to expand more on this section.
So, yeah, that guy, I think he had issues with the guy who was conducting, who was conducting us. What do you call them? There is a very interesting word for them, you know.
Doctors?
Not conductors, smuggler. He was a smuggler. The guy who was smuggling us, you know, from Malawi, no, from Tanzania to Malawi. The guy who had, let's put it this way. The guy who had issues in the train had issues with the smuggler, you know. Okay. I think the smuggler was asking for more money and the guy didn't have more money. Okay. And then all of the sudden, like, you know, something clicked in his head and things went wrong. And then he started, you know, pointing out names, and he could not speak Swahili. And so he started, you know, calling out things in Rwandan language. And we were afraid that other Tanzanians who were traveling with us, they would say, okay, now here we have strangers with us. You know, they'll start asking questions. Who are you? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? And we were all terrified because from the beginning we were told and we were instructed by our smuggler that we don't have to speak in the train no matter what.
You just keep your mouth shut. Because when I was reading it, I was like, they ought not to say anything because this part reads like a movie. And I was imagining it in my head. This was as if I was watching it like a movie as I was reading it. I was like, why would he talk? You all supposed to keep quiet. But when you said he was really about his own trauma, and I was like, oh, wow, this is bad.
Yeah. So, yeah, when the situation went that wrong, basically we decided to flee because then the police started coming. People started basically talking.
Yeah.
You know, people started asking, wondering who are these people. Yeah. They started talking in Swahili that we couldn't really make out the.
Yeah.
So I was let out through a window. Wow. You know, and the other people were also going out through the window. And my grandparents continued because they couldn't go through the window. I mean, they were old and, you know, we are traveling with women. Only very few men and few women who were very young at that time managed to get out through the window. But the older ones basically continued, the train continued moving. So it was a very critical moment. But people have to do whatever they can in that kind of circumstances to survive. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but then later on, we were reunited, I think, after 4 weeks. We reported ourselves to a police station, and then police started tracing us. Now, luckily, we were not sent to Rwanda. You know, we were sent to another refugee camp within Tanzania. And then we stayed in that refugee camp for a while. And later on, we reorganized ourselves, and then we left the country for the second time.
Wow, that's fascinating. You know, I also have another question, which I found a bit confidential, but my curiosity, wouldn't permit me to skip it. You know, I was shocked at your uncle's reaction to you when you needed their help mostly. I was surprised by the level of meanness and some sort of artlessness, I'll call it, at sending you back to the refugee camp all the way from Malawi because you dismissed an ordinary request. I think I mentioned in my review and I was like, what kind of uncle does that? So could you tell us a bit about this experience and how it makes you feel?
Now I'm calm about everything. Now I love my uncles, all of them, you know. Um, uh, and I love I love them even during that period because they were my fathers. They were people that I looked up to for help. It just reached a situation whereby they had lost really total hope in education. You know, they wanted to succeed as young people, and they wanted manual labor. And so, unfortunately, I happened to be there. You know, readily available to work. They had lost hope in education, I would say, to an extent that they felt like, you know, even myself, I had no future in education. So they wanted to train me in business, but they also wanted me to work for them, you know, freely. And so, but I always insisted in education because my mother was a teacher and I was a very good student in school, you know.
Yeah, you said so.
And so I never wanted to give up school. So we had conflicts always, you know, we had conflicts about me going to school, up to the extent that I did something that angered them one day. And then they said, okay, well, this is it for you, Gabriel. We can handle you no more. So we're going to send you back to the refugee camp. And this particular uncle sent me back to a refugee camp with nothing after all years of hard work in his grocery shop. And that part is very sad, but you know, I was very young at that time. I had, you know, anger. I had issues with them, but now I've grown up to understand the situation. I love them, you know. I love them. It was out of their negligence and ignorance as well, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's fascinating. That's great to know. You know, apart from RUN ELVIN, is there any other book you've written in time past, or are you currently working on another book?
Yeah. So I thought my second book was going to be that of my experience here in Canada during the first 4 years or first 5 years as a student.
Okay.
I'm still working on that particular book. It's called, I had titled it The World I Live. It was supposed to be also an open letter to a friend of mine. But then I renamed it, you know, Cracked Paper, you know, Cracked Paper. I'm going to explain that later on in the book, probably in the author's note when the book is done. So I'm working on that as my second project. And then you remember I'm working on this book as a trilogy, you know. So RUN ELVIN is the first one. Cracked Paper will be the second one. The last book will be my vivid autobiography, but that is when I'll be old, you know, like if I happen to reach my 50s or my 60s, that's when I write my bibliography of everything that happened, to connect the dots, things that I did not say in my first book and things that I did not say in my second book. Basically like a bibliography, you know, like that of the likes of Nelson Mandela or others.
That's great. That sounds like a very good project. I'm fascinated to know about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. But I also plan to transition from non-fiction to basically writing fiction and poetry. I'm still working on that. I'm still reading different kinds of books to learn and to inspire myself. So yeah.
That'll be great. That'll be great. I look forward to what you will come up in terms of nonfiction, in terms of poetry, and the other trilogies as well. Okay, could you also tell us a bit about the anti-Hutu and Tutsi racism? Because I know that's a particular sort of tribe. I'm not sure if it's a tribe, but I think I read some things about them. But I'd love to hear from you. Could you tell us a bit about the anti-Hutu and Tutsi racism?
Yeah, so those were tribes whose hatred basically, you know, were cemented by colonialism. At this point in time, myself, I don't consider myself a Tutsi or a Hutu or a Twa or anything at all. There's none of those descriptions that I identify with, because because of their history, right? They have a very, very dark history. People have basically mostly people who are knowledgeable politicians, you know, community leaders in Rwanda, people who want to gain something out of their communities after inciting violence have basically used, you know, those two tribes or ethnicities, as they call them, basically just to gain their profits, and people end up killing each other. And so it's really something, as I explained in the book, it's something that was given power by colonialism in 1930 when they gave it, you know, they officially announced that these tribes are very different and these tribes have to be given identification. And so I think even during the Rwandan genocide, people were killed after having been asked to provide their identification cards. You know, it didn't matter how you looked like, you know, but they would ask you face an identification card, because there is no way how you can distinguish a Tutsi from a Hutu, or those things are non-existent. You know, the things that white people taught Rwandans to believe in, that you are different because of your hate. The Tutsis are more like white people because they have long nose, they are taller and they are slender and they are smart. Those things were false, you know, those things were false. So during the genocide, mostly people would be killed because they provided an identity that said they belonged to a Tutsi tribe. The Hutus were spared, but also the Hutus who supported the Tutsis were also killed. You see, so it's a very tough situation. It's very sad. But I myself, as a young Rwandan, and especially after reading the Rwandan history, I strongly don't believe in that. Now, the people I grow up with, you know, the people I grow up with and the people I left in the refugee camp, mostly still identify, they still believe in that. But I think that is because of lack of education and lack of reading, because if they read specific books, I think they will be able basically to also mark up a path for themselves and say, well, at some point you're going to have to put an end to this madness and just accept ourselves as people, as humanity, or, you know. But what happened in Rwanda should not happen anywhere else. The Tutsi and the Hutu and the Twa tribe should not have existed in the first place. I think right now what they are doing in Rwanda, the government has tried basically to erase ethnicities, but not successfully, because the ways in which they do it is very problematic, and I'm very critical. And I'm very critical of their approach, of the government's approach, because while they try to do it, they also cement Tutsi. You see, they also cement Hutus. So it's more or less like always people in power, always people in governance, always people who want to rule the majority or the population or the citizens. People have got a particular knowledge of, they always find a way to manipulate those ethnicities just to reach their gains, and that's what the government also does right now. It's just that people are not very educated enough about these issues. The government has not offered them space to be educated on these issues. It has not offered them place, an open space to talk about it, because in Rwanda, it's a dictatorship. It's and then there's so many problems with that. So it's hard, man. It's very tough.
Well, I love your in-depth response to this. I need to appreciate you for that. Thank you very much. So could you also tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? And what are the challenges you've encountered in terms of marketing your book? And again, what are the mediums you've utilized so far to promote this book? And, more importantly, can you tell us about Living Books?
Yeah, sure. So I decided to self-publish because I had submitted my book to different kinds of publishers,
Yeah.
And none accepted my book. All I received were rejections, And so in May, basically, in November last year, that's when I decided to self-publish. Partly because of that frustration. And I also wanted to learn, what is the publishing industry like, this self-publishing? How does it work? I did it on Amazon with the help of Mary Metcalf, who is also a publisher. She allowed me basically to use her, she helped me with the publishing itself because I published under Laskin Publishing, which is a very small, publishing company here in Canada. But self-publishing is tough for a person who doesn't have the skills to self-publish because you have to do all the marketing on your own.
Yeah.
You have to find a market for your book even when after it's published. So for me, it's been hard. I've tried to do it my own way, it's been very confusing, but I managed to sell a few copies, I managed to sell a few copies. And then I'm also still building on my marketing strategy. But right now, I'm not focusing on the book because the book is already published. I'm done with that book. I don't want to go back to it.
Yeah.
If someone is going to pick it up, it's probably in the next few years, I'm going to look at it and re-examine my strategies, my marketing strategies, and those with very good professionals but I just wanted to get it out there. For Liven Books, it is a company. It is a not-for-profit, publishing company that I decided basically to start so that I can also encourage young people who are being, young people who are writing about refugee issues, young people who are talking about colonialism, young people who are writing about their immigrant experiences. And young people are just writing about, who are excited to write, basically to provide them a channel to publish through Liven Books. Now, I've been trying to build, a profile of the company, and I'm still doing that. It's basically a publishing company that will be publishing works written by young people who are refugees, but also young people who are immigrants here in Canada or in different other countries. And other young people who are just writing about, critical literature, I'm building a profile of it basically to become a very good publishing house. I'm building a team basically to support the work that we'll be doing. And it's finally coming together. The project proposal, I've already finished working on that. And I'm about to submit it to people whom I think can help me basically implement what I've been planning. So
that's fascinating. I'm happy to know about that, and I hope it goes on smoothly. Yeah. So is there anything that you would love to share with the viewers about RUN ELVIN that I did not mention in my interview and you just thought you'd love the viewers to know?
I don't think so.
Okay.
The book is it talks about my experiences growing up, but then there is more to my experiences that I did not talk about. Okay. It's a memoir, and with memoir, basically, you select the different kinds of memories that you think, you can write about. But I think many people have got questions about my book, and most people ask me about, Ervin's mother is not in the book. There is nowhere I mention about Ervin.
That reminds me. I didn't see Ervin, and when I saw RUN ELVIN, I thought it's like an instruction from probably a father to a son, like I just supposed, because I think Ervin, I don't know, is Ervin your young boy?
Yeah, Ervin is my son.
Okay, I think that's I could grasp that. So when I saw RUN ELVIN, and ELVIN did not actually show up himself in the entire book, I thought, okay, maybe ELVIN is gonna come in the second book series.
Yeah, Ervin showed up in the book, in the last chapters of the book. That's when I talk about him. But then I also, most people have asked me why I don't mention Ervin's mother in the book, and it's not a romantic book, you know. It's not a book about romance, about what happened. No, it's a very serious book about you know, the Rwandan genocide and the effects of that it has had on multiple generations growing up. So people have got questions around, you know, Ervin's mother or our love relations, or that those things would never be in that book, and those things could never be discussed in. Probably when I am 50 years old, or when I get 60 years old, in my,
You can talk about
you know, my bibliography, I can talk about it, because it's going to be a book about pretty much everything, right?
Part of the book. And I need to appreciate the fact that the book is not only talking about your autobiography, it's not only talking about your experience being you know, a refugee, stuff like that, like a memoir. It's also a delve into what is happening in Africa. It's a look into, you know, the colonization, the issue with Africans from African countries, and that's very fascinating. So, is there anything, you know, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling to publish in a book like yours? What sort of advice did you have for people who are, you know, working towards publishing a book? If you have any sort of advice for people in that category, I think that'll be fine.
I think the good thing is basically to write, you know, just write whatever you are writing. Keep working on it. And when you think it's complete, give it to someone with writing experience to look over it and to edit. Okay. And then right now, Amazon has a platform, you know, to self-publish. Yeah. You know, don't be afraid to self-publish your book, because in the process, you're going to learn so many things, you know. Yeah. But it also, you get an opportunity to publish through another publisher. Like, take the opportunity, you know, take the opportunity, because then it's going to give you more connections. It is going basically to remove so much weight, you know, like the marketing things that you have done on your own. The publisher is going to help with that. Yeah. But otherwise, the most important thing for young writers who are writing is just write. And connect with people who have got experience in writing, to look over it, to look over your drafts and give you feedback.
That's fine. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So, viewers, we've just spoken with Gabriel Ndayishimiye, the author of RUN ELVIN, a powerful, you know, saddening, emotional, you know, a memoir that delves into his experience growing up as a refugee, and how he eventually crossed to Canada through the help of a scholarship. And also, it also delve into the colonization in most African countries. And it's a pleasure to speak with Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Thank you very much, Mr. Gabriel, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Peter. Bye now.
Yeah.